Hello and welcome to my channel. In this one I'm doing a colored pencil drawing of a crocodile jumping out of the water. Let's have a look at the drawing process. This is the paper I'm going to be working on, the 1000 grit wet to dry sandpaper. The size is about 8 times 11 inches. So you can buy this paper in any hardware store. It works really well with colored pencils, and I think it's a cheaper alternative to some artist quality papers, or at least it's cheap where I can buy it. I don't know, some people complain that these sandpapers are a little bit more expensive where they live. I don't really know anything about that, but for me I think it's very affordable and it works really well with the pencils I use. I'm going to be using Faber-Castell Polychromos colored pencils. I also like this grayish background color. It works really well with any different types of drawings. So I'm starting with the teeth here at the top, and I'm drawing these with an ivory colored pencil. I'm going to be adding some grayish and some other tones as well, but for the darker details I'm using a black colored pencil. I'm drawing the teeth with a combination of that ivory colored pencil and a little bit of ochre, because they do appear a bit yellowish. And the ivory colored pencil is like a yellowish white, but it's a very light color. So occasionally, if I feel like I need a little bit more color, or if I need a little bit more value, I'll go over it with something a little bit darker, or maybe I will start with something darker and then layer a lighter pencil on top. So on this surface I have the option to do both. I can work from light to dark and from dark to light. I can put in multiple layers. And here at the top, because this part of the jaw area is facing up, so it's closer to the light source, it's going to be a lot lighter. I mean, the skin is a bit lighter here as well, but also because it's more exposed to the light source, it's going to be additionally lighter than the rest of the skin. So I'm going to be using some lighter colors there. Between the teeth, to indicate that these are shadow areas, I'm using a black colored pencil, and this gives me a lot of contrast. And for the mouth and the palate area I used some ochre, because in the reference photo that area looked a little bit yellowish, brownish, I don't know. I may modify it a little bit with some other colors. So I'm going to draw the combination, I'm going to draw the skin on the upper jaw area and the nose area with a combination of some let's say grayish colors. I used a little bit of light warm gray and mid-tone warm gray. My background color of the paper is already a mid-tone gray, and for the shadow areas and the texture I'm going to use a black colored pencil. For the teeth I'm mostly using this ivory colored pencil, but like I said, I will modify it with some darker colors where needed, like a burnt ochre to make the teeth look a bit more yellowish, or even a burnt sienna where I need some even darker values. I have a pretty nice range of grey colors in this Faber-Castell range. Plus I can buy them separately where I live, so that's another good thing. And I do like the fact that I can use these lighter grays when I need to. Now you see that I'm dividing the skin with a black colored pencil into these segments or scales, if you want to call them that, so that I can achieve that rough 3D appearance of the crocodile skin. And one of the things that helps me a little bit, because this is a somewhat complex subject, mostly because of the skin. But one of the things that helps me is to draw those darker areas first, and that helps me navigate through the rest of the body a little bit more easily. I'm drawing the rest of this mouth area using a combination of burnt ochre and now a little bit of cinnamon. The cinnamon is a little bit more pinkish, a little bit more of a flashy tone, so I think it will work well for the mouth and the palate area. The reference photo is in the description if you want to examine it, compare. So here I'm drawing some indications of those shadow areas between the individual scales or those segments in the skin. And then I go in and draw the lighter details with a light gray pencil. This is not the lightest gray that I have, but it's one of the lighter ones, I suppose. The lightest one that I have is almost white. It's like an off-white color. But you can see that here I'm trying to produce a little bit more value and also a little bit more texture to make that skin look a bit more rough. I'm going to start with the teeth on the other side, and that part of the jaw, the lower jaw on the other side, will be also a lot lighter than the rest of the body. I'm just adding some teeth here as well and adding some details to the mouth area. Now, at one point I noticed that my colors were a little bit too dull. The color of the skin was a little bit too dull, so I started throwing in some slightly more vibrant, more interesting colors. I put in a little bit of a raw umber, which is like a dull yellowish brown, and then even a little bit of yellowish green color. And I think that improved the appearance of the crocodile skin, because I don't really want it like a completely dull gray or a cool gray. Initially I used a little bit of cool gray for some of these lighter areas, and I didn't really like the effect, so I gradually started switching to slightly warmer colors, and I think that's a little bit closer to what I wanted to achieve. So I'm mostly going to be using the warmer gray and the ivory colored pencil for the really lighter areas, and then the mid-tone gray and a touch of raw umber and a bit of green for those slightly darker colors, and of course black colored pencil for those lines and wrinkles and shadows in the skin. So once again, here on the lower jaw, I'm drawing the teeth with an ivory colored pencil, and you can see that it appears almost white. It's like an off-white yellowish color, but very close to white. So it's the lightest color that I've used so far, and also on this upper part of the lower jaw. And then on this lower part here, I'm going to use a little bit more of the raw umber, because I want that part to be a little bit darker. There's a little bit more shadow there. Whatever is further away from the light source, or whatever is facing away from the light source, needs to be darker. I'm just going back and forth and kind of revising or reworking some parts of that jaw area. And now I'm adding some other colors here and there. Here I want to create some kind of a mixture of an ivory colored pencil and that raw umber. The idea is to make that, because you see the lower part of the body is clearly of lighter color, the belly area also, but I can't draw all of it with an ivory colored pencil because that part is further away from the light source. So I need to introduce some slightly darker colors. So I'm mixing the ivory with a bit of raw umber, and I will add a little bit of ochre here and there to give it some of those yellowish tones. And I'm doing that on the teeth as well. So I'm going to introduce some of those darker colors to mix them in with the ivory and get a color that looks like a lighter color of the skin, but not that bright because it's further away from the light source. So you always need to keep in mind that you need to have that range of value. Even though something appears lighter and you can see that it's of lighter color, for example, of a white color, like the skin on the belly area. I don't know if it's a white color, or a yellowish white or something, but the thing is that when it's in the shadow, it's going to have to be darker. So we always need to keep that in mind. We always need to understand the color and the tone depends on the relationship or the position in relation to the light source. And you need to have that range of value in order to be able to describe the shape of the animal. And to describe those smaller shapes on the skin, I am drawing those small lines in the skin and then drawing lighter lines or lighter details on top of that in order to make those individual scales look more three-dimensional. So basically, when it comes to value, contrast, and range of value, there are two things happening here. First, there are larger contrasts, which are used to describe larger shapes and larger relationships between the lighter and darker parts of the body, depending on their position relative to the light source. And then there are smaller shapes within those larger shapes, where we also can see that contrast between the lighter and darker values. So here I'm using a black colored pencil to draw some of those smaller lines or wrinkles in the skin, dividing the skin into a bunch of those smaller segments or scales, if you will. Sometimes I will use a brown colored pencil, sometimes I will use a black for that. I can also control how dark those lines will be by simply using less pressure with a black colored pencil, or if I feel like it's too dark or too dull, I will simply go over it with another pencil. So that's another huge advantage of this paper, because I can always rework certain areas, and I can layer on top of the colors that I already put down. So here I'm drawing an area of darker skin, and you can see how I also drew these darker details, darker shapes with a black colored pencil, and now I'm adding a touch of ivory to make it look like some of those scales are of a little bit lighter color. And then here on this cheek area, or the lower jaw area, whatever it is, I'm using an ivory colored pencil, but I'm mixing it with a raw umber, which I already laid down previously. And occasionally I may, as you can see, also use some blending tools. I used a brush a little bit just then, and here I'm back to using a black colored pencil. I see some darker patches of skin, like some darker spots and stuff like that. They are of a very irregular shape, so I decided to include those as well. And then of course there are these scales which are of irregular shape. Some of them appear kind of circular, others kind of rectangular, or even hexagonal. I'm not really sure what the exact shape is most of the time, but I'm trying to imitate the appearance or approximate their appearance as best as I can. I'm using the reference photo as a sort of guideline. I am not going to stick to it religiously. I'm not going to try to position every scale in its proper place, and I'm not going to try to draw every scale exactly the way it looks in the reference photo. I just want to capture the general idea. Now the skin is a little bit darker on the back here to the left, and there are also some of these larger bulging scales that kind of look like the stuff that you would see on dinosaurs or dragons. But there's another thing that I noticed about these scales, is that their size varies in different parts of the body. So in some parts of the body they appear a little bit smaller and packed more tightly together, whereas in other parts of the body they're kind of stretched out a little bit. That depends on the part of the body and how the skin covers or folds or shapes, adjusts its shape to that part of the body. So on the left side I added a little bit of green, darker green. I used a pine green, and then I will mix that with a black, and here on the throat and the belly area I will use more of the raw umber. I'm using that raw umber because that, combined with an ivory colored pencil, that's going to give me a slightly darker yellowish white color, or an off-white color, and I will be able to control the amount of value to make some of the shadow areas a little bit darker, and those bulging areas which are receiving more light from the light source, I'm going to make them a little bit lighter as needed. And of course there's still a lot more work to be done on the scales and stuff like that. At this point I decided to do a little bit of work on the background. Normally when I draw these wildlife portraits and drawings in colored pencil on this surface, I will often just create a vignette without any background. But here I decided to include a little bit of the background. So the crocodile is jumping out of the water, and you can see that in the reference photo. I'm going to make this a little bit different because I want this to remain a vignette, and I will fade the bottom portion of the scene, so I won't draw all the way to the edge of the paper, and I'm not going to try to draw all of the background. But the thing is that for the color of the water, I tried using a little bit of raw umber and even a bit of nougat, and now I'm experimenting by adding a little bit of greenish color. The thing is that I want to produce a color that is a dull color that looks like a muddy or a murky water, and then I will add some lighter details on top of that. For those lighter details I will use light warm gray pencil, and I will use it to create these lighter ripples in the water. So these are just suggestions of the gentle movement of the water a little bit further away from the main subject, and I will make the ones which are further back a little bit smaller, and the ones which are closer to our viewpoint a little bit larger. And I can also group these shapes together a little bit. And around the body of the animal I will add a little bit more of that lighter value, and also make it look like the water is pulled up by the emerging body of the animal, which is jumping out of the water. And I will also add some effects of maybe foamy splashing water around the body. But of course I'm just making some suggestions of that splashing water. I will rework that and refine that hopefully a little bit later. But before I do that, I'll still need to do a bit more work on the body, on the crocodile's body. So I'm going to add a few more ripples on the right side as well. And like I said, there's no need to overdo it, just a few suggestions, with the ones further back being a little bit smaller and the ones which are closer to us being a little bit larger, a little bit thicker. So here I'm kind of curving my strokes, trying to make it look like there are some small waves forming around the body of the animal, and like the water is being pulled upwards, like it's splashing upwards. And here I added a touch of white pencil to further increase that effect of the splashing water. And now I'm going to do some refining on this part of the skin, on the back area. So if you look at the skin, it looks a little bit darker on the back area, a little bit lighter on, actually quite a bit lighter on the belly area. I also did some blending on that foamy part of the water just to soften it a little bit. So here just adding some splashing effects, like some random droplets of water splashing around here and there, and just trying to imitate the shape of those ripples of water forming around the body of the animal. Sorry. I'm adding some more of those scales, trying to make their shape kind of irregular and unpredictable, because I want to make it look a bit more random and a bit more organic, I suppose. But the point is that this left side of the body, or the top part of the body, needs to be of darker color. I think it was a good decision for me to start throwing in those brownish and greenish tones for the skin, because I really like the colors now. They look a lot more interesting than initially when I started working with just those grays. It looked a little bit too dull, but now we have some really nice colors. So here I'm trying to define this transition between the head and the neck area. There is a little bit of shadow here where this lower jaw area is bulging out, and then this is the throat area. So there is a bit of shadow between the head and the neck area, but I still need to draw these small lines to indicate the shape of those scales. And once again, this is something I've mentioned previously. You can see how some of them are a lot smaller and packed a lot more tightly together, whereas others are stretched out a little bit more. And I think that's important. It's important to capture both their size and the shape, because that will make the not just the skin more realistic, it will also further enhance that suggestion of the shape of the body. So you can see this lower jaw area and the area just above the throat, it's kind of bulging out a little bit, and by drawing those scales in such a way that they are kind of stretching out and getting a little bit larger in that area, you can further enhance that round appearance or bulging appearance of some parts of the body, if that makes sense. Anyway, as we move further to the belly area, those scales will be getting larger and larger. But to further increase the range of value, you can see that I'm going back in between those darker lines and just adding a touch of ivory colored pencil, further increasing the contrast and making some of them a little bit lighter. I want to make it look like some of those scales are lighter even in that darker area, or area of darker skin to the left. And here I'm also trying to make the this part a little bit lighter, so you can see how just by going over some of these scales and going over that part of the body with an ivory colored pencil, adding a little bit more of that lighter color, you can see how that part of the body is starting to appear like it's bulging out, like it's more protruded, and like its the top part of that surface is more exposed to the light source. So by manipulating the amount of value and these subtle differences in value, we can explain shapes to the viewer. And this is very important, because if you neglect these subtle differences in value, everything will look kind of flat, and you don't want that lower part of the body to look flat. So it's not enough to just focus on drawing the scales and trying to imitate that appearance of the crocodile's skin. It's also important to capture those transitions between the areas of lighter and darker value, and sometimes these transitions, as you can see here, will be very gradual, very soft, and in other cases you will have more sudden or more clear transition between an area of lighter and darker value, like a cleaner edge to value, or a more stark contrast between an area of lighter and darker value. Another thing that I started throwing in, I don't know if you saw, I started throwing in a little bit of that burnt ochre here and there. One of the things that I've noticed when I use a lot of the lighter pencils like light warm grey or this ivory colored pencil is that I sometimes end up with drawings that look a little bit too dull for my taste. I do tend to prefer duller colors a lot of the time, but sometimes, mostly because of the influence of the background, they can be a little bit too dull. So every now and then I will go back in and add some slightly more vibrant colors, like a little bit of burnt ochre or even a little bit of burnt sienna, which is a reddish brown. And these additions are very subtle, but they do make a huge difference because they will make the main subject look a bit more colorful and a bit more lively. Now, if you look at the scales on the throat and the belly area, you will see that there are some random darker patches of skin here and there. I wanted to include those as well. I don't really know if that's just a color of the skin in that area, or maybe it's some kind of a damage or a scar in the skin. I have no idea. But I saw it in the reference and I thought that it would be interesting to include those darker patches of skin here and there, because it will make the skin look a bit more random and a bit more natural. So I'm just I drew the almost reticulated pattern of the skin and the scales on the belly area, and now I'm just going in with some ivory colored pencil, trying to make them look a little bit more three-dimensional, and usually adding a little bit more value to the top part of each and every one of those segments, just to stay consistent with the light source which is coming from above. So now I'm going to do a little bit more work on the water, just adding a little bit more of that foamy splashing water around the body of the crocodile, especially here on the right side, because that's the part that I haven't done yet. So first I'm starting with light warm grey, and the light warm grey is not that light, as you can see, but it's a lot lighter than the base color that I used for the water, which is dull yellowish brownish color, I suppose. Here I want to add some more effects of splashing water and water being pulled upwards as the crocodile is emerging. But at the same time I have to leave this as a vignette because I want to fade the bottom part of it. Now I'm adding a little bit of white pencil to create some additional contrast in the water and to make some parts of it extra foamy and extra splashy. But every now and then I will go over it with a brush if I don't like certain shapes, or if I feel like some of these shapes should be softened. So with a white pencil I was able to draw some of those droplets of water here and there, which kind of made it look like a splashing water. And I added a little bit more of that brownish color at the bottom to finish the vignette in that area. And finally I'm just going to add a few more touches of this light warm grey, like almost like circles forming around the crocodile, like waves forming around it. And I think this is really improving the appearance of the water, and it looks a lot closer to what I wanted to achieve. I'm going to add another group of shapes here to the right, and with just a little bit more work on the water, we're almost done. So here's my signature right there, and now the drawing is done. I hope you like it. Don't forget to check out my other videos, and for longer videos, full-length versions of the videos, check out my Patreon. Bye bye.